Welcome to MetaPod, the podcast where we discuss operational execs and organizations that make and move stuff, and our common headaches, digital transformation, the forever labor shortage, and doing more with less. And now, the host of MetaPod, Ron Crabtree.
Okay, it's Ron Crabtree back here with another episode of MetaPod, where I bring together thought leaders that can share some interesting unique insights to those three common challenges that organizations involved with tangible goods, manufacturing, and related in North America in particular, the forever labor shortage, digital transformation, digitization of work, and just needing to do more with less. And I have here with me today Travis Ellinger, who I've known for a while now, and I've had some pretty pleasant conversations with him. Recently was on a webinar with one of our partners with Advanced Purchasing Dynamics, and I really liked what he had to say on that particular topic. So he's going to be sharing with us some perspectives around this whole forever labor shortage challenge and how we can get a lot more done with the people that we have. And that's the key thing here that's important. And, how do we overcome that forever labor shortage phenomenon? So you'll find this episode interesting if you find yourself struggling with labor shortages, especially those that are somewhat technical, and some ideas about how we can offset some of those rising costs through efficiency gains with the existing workforce, I think this is going to be pretty interesting. So, Travis, tell us a little bit about you.
Well, number one, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here, and this is a topic I'm very passionate about. So, look forward to the discussion today. Yes, I'm the president of Strategic Manufacturing Solutions. We're a relatively new organization formed just under 2 years ago. Prior to starting the company, I worked at Ford in about 20 years in their supplier technical assistance group. And over the course of my career, I've been in probably 400 or 500 manufacturing facilities, helping manufacturers improve on a number of fronts, quality, capacity, cost improvements. And, I had so much fun doing that. I decided to go on my own. And so here we are, and we're doing some pretty interesting things. Interestingly enough, the three topics that you just mentioned, specifically the labor shortage and how to do more with less, that is a day in and day out challenge of how we help our clients.
Yeah, Travis and I share a common background. We were both hammered out on the automotive anvil, the early adopters of Lean Six Sigma and all the pressures to figure out how to, be a lot more efficient with everything we do. There's a few industries more competitive and, challenging, frankly, than the automotive space. And being a tier one supplier isn't necessarily a lot of fun, depending on what's going on. So what Travis will do for us next is I'm interested in some diagnostics here, maybe a couple stories to tell of when it comes to getting more out of the people that we have. What should we be examining maybe three diagnostics around what do you look at? Why are you looking at it? What's the evidence to indicate to you that there's real opportunity or even a threat if we don't act? And then we'll come back later in the podcast and talk about the practical, what do you do about those things? So with that, what would you offer as key things to consider going forward?
I would touch on three key areas. Number one, the forever labor shortage, specifically on the technical resources. Two, especially now where everyone's looking to mitigate risks related to tariffs, whether that be through, changing manufacturing locations, whether that be reduce costs, this whole concept of doing more with less is more real now than, it's probably been in 4 or 5 years. And then number three, is really an outcome of the first two. With those two challenges, there are some things that are just not happening in manufacturing facilities today that is, in the long term, a significant risk to an organization's not just profitability, but in many cases, survival. So let me break those down a little bit further, right? So let's talk about, that forever labor shortage. What we're seeing today, right, is, think about that manufacturing organization. You look at an org chart, this is more around, the maintenance technicians, the manufacturing engineers, quality engineers, those types of technical resources. they're getting harder and harder to fill for a number of reasons. And you read all about it on the internet as far as, the older generation of the boomers are retiring, and there's just not that experience behind them. But what we're seeing happen with many of our clients is that turns into high turnover. They can't find the right person. So, all right, we're going to find the next best thing, next best available, and we're going to train that person. And lo and behold, just about the time that person gets trained, they're off to make more money to another company. And this process repeats itself over and over. Or, okay, in order to find the talent, we've now got to overpay. And the rates have gone up and up and up. And when you compare the budget, back to what you're paying, it's no longer affordable to bring in the right talent. So, they either leave the position open, they try, to put a Band-Aid on top of a problem that, requires stitches. And so that's when I talk about the labor shortage, that's really it's key in my mind. Switching now to do more with less, right? Again, with the tariffs hitting everybody, I don't think the news properly conveys the amount of soft layoffs that are happening. Either the non-filling of open positions, maybe some small reductions in a workforce here and there. Everyone's trying to find yet another way to do more with less. And of course, headcount is the easiest win because it's instantaneous. The problem with that, of course, is you lose the experience, the expertise, particularly going back to those maintenance positions. If you shim the tool just right, you make a good part. But if you forget the shim, or you use the wrong shim, or you shim in the wrong location, now the quality suffers, the downtime goes up, your costs spiral out of control. So long term, that's a very difficult proposition. Many organizations, whether it be COVID, whether it be the other, cost scenarios over the years, they've pretty much squeezed every drop of juice out of the lemon. They're the piece of fruit, right? There's nothing left to give. Everyone that's left is critical. What else can I do? And if you kind of had that feeling like, all right, I've done everything. If I reduce one more person, I'm already on the knife edge. It's going to put me over the cliff. If you're having that feeling, that's really, who I'm talking to for that second point. So the result of those 2 points, right, kind of gets to the third, what does that mean to the profitability of the company? So the basics are not getting done, right? The preventive maintenance on the equipment, in the supply chain logistics space, cycle counting isn't getting done, in the warehouse like it used to. So now there's more and more part shortages, which means more line downtime, which means rising labor costs because now you have to produce on the weekends and things to overcome, to meet your schedules. Continuous improvement organizations, many of our clients, unfortunately, are in a position where that continuous improvement, that OpEx person on headcount is no longer doing OpEx. They're doing something more critical to the day-to-day, get parts out the door. And so that's a whole area of the business that just isn't being attended to these days. A lot of times, again, going back to that forever labor shortage, you've lost some key people. You don't have the right talent in place anymore. That expertise to train the next generation just isn't there. You're dealing with, the hand that's been dealt to you, or, perhaps you were the dealer and dealt the hand, right? But nonetheless, you have what you have, and that's no longer capable of, doing the training. A lot of generic training out there that isn't customized to a specific manufacturing process or solution. And that generic stuff just doesn't stick as good as something that's, very specific to the task at hand. You can also look at, outsourcing. The problem with outsourcing is very, very expensive. Or if you're in the heart of the Rust Belt, small town USA, maybe the outsourcing is not even available. It's, the lead time's too long and you need it tomorrow. Maybe due to your location, you just don't have that resource available. So when we talk about the doing more with less and kind of the outcomes, that's kind of that third diagnostic point.
You have any stories you could share, examples of an organization, what they found? And what I'm interested in learning, Travis, is what are the metrics for this? What are we measuring? Is there a way to put a measurement? I mean, you talked about a lot of things here, but they feel a little squishy. Is there a way you can measure that or quantify the nature or the scope or the magnitude of the threat?
Absolutely. Some KPIs to consider, right? So on the labor side, you know, time and position, average time and position. Look at the standard deviation. You know, these are all, and you can do an analysis, based on each function, and you can take a look at, each level of the org chart, um, stack it in different ways, analyze it different ways. That's probably the number one, indicator on where to see risk for the labor shortage. On the doing more with less, that's a little bit more tricky to measure specifically, but I would tell you, go back to your basic KPIs. For those of us in manufacturing, we're used to, the monthly management review with corporate or division, right? And you go through all your metrics and you put action plans. Um, Obviously, every manufacturing process is going to have slightly different targets for OEE, downtime, mean time to failure, mean time to repair, those types of things. But at the end of the day, those key metrics are really the basis. Are they deteriorating? Are they stable? Are they at the budget? Those are in why is the budget set, where it's set? Those are really the key metrics to kind of see, all right, are the outcomes getting to be too much?
There an organization you would have helped in recent memory, but you were able to help them get through the fix-it side of it, right, where you got them full cycle without disclosing anything. Could you give an example of real organization you looked at and kind of what you uncovered and discovered that led you to the right actions?
Yes. So again, without disclosing too much, this was an automotive tier one supplier. We had wrapped up this project, within the last few months. When we arrived, they were basically affecting the ability of their customer to produce, not in a mass, but just, a little bit here, a little bit there. And they needed some immediate help. So, we came in, we analyzed the situation, right? So we have an entire assessment process that we follow, a very standardized process. But, you know, two of the key points that I've just mentioned this discussion held true there. So number one, on the people front, they had this fabulous org chart. It was full. You started to peel the onion back. You realized the average time in position across the entire organization was like 3 months. So this was all a new team, kind of coming together basically when we got there. When you talk about, what were the diagnostics? The preventive maintenance hadn't been done in 2 years. Things that should be being done once a month, per manufacturer's recommendations, hadn't been done in years. Cycle counting of the raw materials and components that went into their process was not being completed. I mean, this is a very solid, high severity, worst case situation, but this is kind of what we walked into, right? And then so the approach is, and we're far from unique in this. I mean, our competitors, we all go through the process, right? We do the assessment, we understand the gaps, and then, all right, what are the actions, right, that we can take? And in that particular project, within about a week, we had shut off all of the customer shutdowns. And within about 2 months, we'd gotten back up to schedule. How did we do that? It went back to, focusing on the basics, all right, let's get the PMs done. Let's put a schedule in, right? But then you're on a knife edge. Like, okay, I need to take the machine down to get the maintenance done. But if I take the machine down, I'm not making parts and I get further in the hole with my customer. So it's all the strategy and how you implement those actions and plan those out that is what delivered the success of the project.
Okay. Anything else from a diagnostic perspective you'd like to offer that we should be looking at and considering?
Again, I would just reinforce the message, pay very close attention to your KPIs. In times of stress, you've got to have a tariff strategy. You've got to have a cost reduction strategy. You take your eye off the KPIs, the risk is going to go up. It's honestly, I kind of relate it to raising my children. If I'm asking them every day, did they do their homework? Their homework miraculously always gets done. But if I go a couple of days without asking, oh man, oh shoot, I missed one assignment, right? So it's kind of the same concept, right? Just keep an eye on the KPIs. You don't have to uh, extend immense pressure, but just keep an eye, ask a few follow-up questions to make sure that the KPI owners understand that someone's still watching. That in itself will take care of a lot of things. And then when you see the KPIs drifting off track, then there's time for a call to action.
All right. So let's go ahead and pivot then to, the second half of the podcast around, what do you do? And the audience is interested in stuff they can't easily go Google, right? So you're going to share a little bit of your secret sauce here, or at least examples of what were the successful measures deep down? I mean, paying attention is great, but what were the tactics? What were the strategies that seemed to work that we should be thinking about and considering as part of our action plan?
Yes. So I would offer up a very simple 4-point plan. It sounds simple. I will tell you, it's complicated. It's not easy, but if you follow these 4 steps and you really, put good quality event, this is really the key to success. So number one, and let's just focus, for the purpose of this discussion, let's just, focus on the maintenance side of it. So we always have a kind of a running joke. How many electricians does it take to change a light bulb? The answer should be 0 because it doesn't take an electrician to change a light bulb, right? A Luzzo, I can change the light bulb, but I'm not an electrician. So step 1 is really to decouple the tasks. Find out, all right, if you have that electrician, what's the critical work that an electrician needs to do versus the non-critical tasks that, you can train one of your operators to do. You could train the janitor, some very, non-technical people. You could train them to do those tasks quite easily. And so step 1 is really decouple, right? Separate those.
All right. So hang on a minute here. I want to make sure I understand this concept. This is pretty cool. So I'm familiar with, what's called failure mode and effect analysis. Obviously, you're familiar with that too, where you take a look at, the degree of risk for something happening to the organization, right? How likely is it to happen? What's the magnitude of that? And how, et cetera. And it sounds like you, to an extent, you're taking a hard look at what are our technical resources, maintenance people, spending their time on, and then a critical look at what really matters to keeping the business running. What are the things they have to do because no one else can do it? And if they don't do it, it's you mentioned, the example, if you don't shim the tool right, you're going to have defective parts or even damage your tooling. So it's got to be done right. So you're basically saying, get really careful about what these key resources spend their time on and making sure they're working on the right things. And then use the technique, I call it autonomous maintenance, where in effect you're trying to engage the people who actually run the machines and make production to take on part of the, I'll call them low risk maintenance activities, basic lubrication, inspection, cleaning, maybe even changing out simple wiring harnesses if they get snagged or whatever. Is that where you're going with it? Is that what you're suggesting?
Exactly what I'm suggesting.
Okay.
Even to the example of shimming the tool, you can scribe the tool, with the shim notation. If you can stamp on the tool what size shim needs to be used, right? You can take some steps. That's a little bit, further down my 4-point plan here, right? But that's exactly where I'm headed.
All right. I'm sorry for interrupting. I just want to make sure I understood where you're going with this decoupling. I want to make sure the audience understood what you meant by that.
That's exactly it. It's what are the tasks that require true skilled trades to perform? And what we find in a lot of situations with our clients, the maintenance, the skilled trades is doing a lot more than they need to. And it's something that, was either not thought out at all, or maybe it's scope creep over time. They've just taken on more and more, keep the line running. And it's not something that you typically, it's not at the top of your mind. All right, it's been 6 months since I've looked at that task list. Let me go back and have another look and see what I can do. Right. So it's a very discrete exercise. You should repeat it, I don't know, on an annual basis, perhaps. Like everyone's going to be a little bit different there, but that's definitely the key first step. And then, step 2, reorganize that work, right? So think of a sliding scale, or a graph that starts at 0 and increases, as you move to the right. that far right-hand side, that's the electrician. The far left-hand side is someone that you could hire off the street and teach to do things on day one. And then your tasks, progress in complexity from left to right. So you're going to take all those tasks, you're going to, kind of organize those from simple to complex, if you would, in a very orderly fashion, whether that's by department, by machine, depending on your manufacturing process and how you're organized, that's going to be a little bit different from everybody. But you're going to want to reorganize, along that scale. And then step 3, right? Once you've got those more complex things,
Wait a minute. Wait, before you go to step 3, so basically you are putting a measurement to it. In other words, you're able to create a quantification of there's this amount of activity needs to happen that's ultra critical, has to be done. Then this activity is less critical. But you basically create buckets, but you've quantified that. So you have a rough idea about how many man hours a day or a week are required to stay at status quo or, to be on track. Is that kind of what you're suggesting, is modeling that and then being able to, I'm just trying to understand.
Yeah. So I would say, you're trying to lay out the tasks, from simple to complex, knowing that all the tasks need to get done.
Right.
And eventually you're going to get to step 4 where, like, how do I,
I'm sorry. I keep interrupting you. Yeah. I'm sorry. I'll let you keep going. Okay.
so you're going to, you're trying to organize these tasks from the most simple to the most complex.
I'll be more.
Because, yeah. And then, step 3 is the complex stuff. You've got to have a backup plan. So if you lose that electrician, if you lose, that pipe fitter, whatever trade is required to do that task, what's the backup? And sometimes that's an internal solution. Sometimes that's an external solution. This is where it gets very customized and specialized to, geography, manufacturing process, those types of things. The less complex things, your backup plan is almost always internally. And, you're also going to figure out who's going to get those tasks assigned to them internally, right? And then step 4 is you're going to develop that training plan or that training program to train your current employees on how to do those more simple tasks. And that's something, when you develop that program at the beginning, called a general laborer. This is, pretty traditional skills classification in a manufacturing. You're going to take that general laborer and you're going to give them kind of a path, a career path. When you hit these deliverables, these targets, these expectations, here's your path to, higher paying jobs, more opportunities within the company. And you're going to develop your program so that way you drive retention and employees see, wow, yes, I can go on the outside and I can take a risk and change jobs for 25 cents an hour or whatever. Man, if I stay here where I know I've got a stable future and I've got some seniority built up, and I can take on some additional tasks and I can earn that, by staying put. That's really what we're trying to drive here, right? Is you've got a program, that drives employee retention. Over the course of time, it's going to be significant cost reduction to you as a manufacturer because you're not having to go through all these outsourcings. You're not experiencing these downtimes. You're able to retain those cost savings internally. Drawback of that, obviously, there's a lot of planning involved. There's a lot of implementation time. If I go back to my diagnostic points, you may not have the right resources in place to be able to set this program up for yourself. I can speak from firsthand experience. These programs work very, very well. We, just kind of share an example. We had a client, they approached us and they said, hey, we're in a bit of a pickle. We need to hire 100 skilled trades employees here over the next 30 days. And this particular manufacturer was not in a geographic location that could be accomplished in 30 days. I mean, they're just, the talent wasn't in the area. And this is, kind of where we springboarded with this 4-step process is, okay, why, let's just peel the onion. Why do you need 100 skilled trades? And okay, they laid out, and they've got this many, processes, this many cells, this many lines, this many PM tasks. It takes this much. And that's okay. Why, why skilled trades? And their incoming assumption was that, well, this is all work that skilled trades has to do because, it's maintenance. So therefore maintenance people have to do it. That's when we had the light bulb moment. Like, okay, what if there was a better way? And so we were able to design this program for them, implement it. And, the payback period to our client was about 6 months. The cost of our program paid itself off in cost savings back to them in less than 6 months because they were able to, use their general labor, give them that career path, assign the tasks, train them. And, people wanted to stay. Right. And so we still check in, with this client. It's been probably about a year or so. And, it's still a very highly successful training program. When you look at their HR KPIs for, turnover, they're all headed in a very positive direction. And they would tell you that one of the things that they attribute that to is this program, because it's really, the employees saw this as a way to, to help themselves. And, we were obviously, excited that we were able to help a client. But it felt like a lot more than just that because of, all what it meant for them, their long-term sustainability. And, that was probably one of the better projects that I'd done.
So I'm guessing a deliverable in there would have been some sort of a skills matrix or a versatility diagram. You know what I mean by that?
Yes,
Was that
absolutely.
an important deliverable? And can you describe that for the audience?
Yeah. So, for those that aren't familiar, right, that skills matrix takes a look at, if you think of any spreadsheet, right, that very left-hand column is everybody's name. In that very first row are all the skills that you need to be trained in. And then that matrix takes a look at who do you have and what have they been trained to do. And in many cases, there's a sliding scale. As an example, one might be a beginner. Hey, I can do the task, but I need to have someone with me. 5 is I'm the expert. I can train other people how to do the task. And the goal is over time, you're trying to build your team from 1s to 5s. And you want to make sure that you have, not everyone has to be trained in every task, right? But you want to make sure you have multiples for each of the tasks. So that way, you have those backup plans in place should you need them.
Yeah, and I'm guessing that, and you said something earlier, I'm sure you worked into that, is you do that in a visible fashion so that employees could say, okay, if I want to make more money or advance in the company should have been communicating, the more boxes you check with respect to capabilities and the higher level of skills, the lot stickier you're going to be here and who's going to be on the short list for opportunities in the future. Would that be true or not true?
So that is absolutely true. How that program is cascaded is super important. We even have one client that shared a story. This is not part of a project that we'd done, but it was a very interesting concept. They had an employee recognition dinner. They invited all the employees and they invited their spouses to the dinner. And as one of the agenda points in the dinner was a presentation from HR on the program on how they could progress their careers. And, the unintended positive consequence of that was you had a lot of spouses on the drive home saying, hey, you should really look into this. I think you could, sir, this has to be good for the family, and, they were very open, like, hey, that wasn't the purpose of why we invited the spouses. It was truly for recognition, but it had a really cool unintended positive consequence to the company.
Yeah, that is hilarious, but I can see that working on the drive home. The wife says, "So, honey, why are you not, doing X, Y, Z? So you're going to be the next up for a promotion or the next pay raise." And that is kind of brilliant if you think about it that way. All right, well, cool. So anything else you would offer from, last points here around what to go do when faced with these sorts of challenges? Any other sage advice you'd offer before we get into wrap up?
Well, I would say it really comes down to making sure you have a robust plan. And unfortunately, with the market conditions today, with the labor shortages, with, doing more with less, unfortunately, we're seeing less and less planning these days. And it's tragic, but it's a sad reality. And, but it's quite honestly what we're good at. And so part of our statement of purpose, or what's motivating for us, is we get to kind of help reinstall some of that. It makes it pretty rewarding in the end.
Very cool. All right. Well, in that case, Travis, we'll get toward wrap up now. If folks want to get in touch with you, pick your brain, ask you questions. How did you do that? Uh, how do people get in touch with you?
Yeah, I think there's really two key ways. One, you can go to our website, strategicmanufacturing-solutions.com. You can check out all of the interesting things that we have to offer there. We're actually going through a website upgrade here over the next couple of weeks, so it'll probably be a much cooler experience here towards the end of May. But nonetheless, there's a lot of good relevant material there now. And you can always drop me a line, travis.ellinger@strategicmanufacturing-solutions.com.
Travis, thanks for joining me here.
Yeah, no, appreciate you having me. Like I mentioned at the beginning, I'm pretty passionate about the topic. Manufacturing needs help now more than ever. And, we're just so excited to be part of it. And I appreciate you having us on to talk about it.
Thank you, Travis.
All right. We'll talk to you soon. Thank you.
All right, great. Hey, everybody. Thanks for joining me for this episode of MetaPod. I hope you like this. And if you do, be sure to share it with others. Be sure to follow, and subscribe if you will. And so we can keep this great knowledge coming to everybody. So thanks again for joining us.
Thank you for joining MetaPod. For requests on topics or to ask questions, you can connect with Ron Crabtree 3 ways: via email at metapod@metaexperts.com, via LinkedIn, or by calling him directly at 734-425-1455, extension 103. Lastly, if you love the show, please consider leaving a 5-star review on your favorite podcast app. We truly appreciate all your support.